Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 13 Pro Max has been out for about 3 months at this point. I've been using it most of the time, and the entire time I've been using it, it has not had a case or screen protector on it. So I wanted to talk about durability, scratches, what it's like to use, the display, and much more. And this video is brought to you and sponsored by Anchor. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now, the first thing is the design and size. The design is basically the same as last year's phone, the iPhone 12 Pro Max. We've got squared off edges, and I really like these as far as being able to hold on to it. I find it more grippy when you have squared off edges than you do with rounded edges. Now, I like the rounded edges, and I find them to be more ergonomic, but with the squared off edges, it brings me back to the iPhone 5 days, where it just feels a little bit more premium in my opinion, and more solid. But it's less ergonomic when swiping across the display. It's not as smooth, of course, because you have this edge. So you either love this design or you don't like it as much as the other, but most people seem to like it quite a bit. As far as its overall size, well, I keep coming back to the max size phone, and some people thought maybe I'm holding a pro sized phone or 13, and you can see here's the 13 right here. My hands are quite large, and so I find myself going back to the 13 Pro Max just because it looks like a normal phone in my hands. So it's easy to reach across the display. So if I want to reach across all the way over the display, I have no problem. And even going up to the top of the display, it's not an issue. So I can reach to the top with my thumb. I do have to do a bit of stretching with my hand, but I can do that without a problem. And it feels like a normal size phone to me. So for that reason, it seems to be the perfect size for me personally. I have found myself going back and forth between the Pro and the Pro Max, but I typically come back to the Max for a couple different reasons. And one of them is its overall size and display, and of course battery life. We'll talk about that in a moment. The 13 Pro Max is a little bit heavier than it was before. It has this larger camera module, which does take better photo and video in most situations, and it does add some additional weight. Along with the internal battery being larger, it just feels a little bit heavier. To me, it was noticeable at first. It still feels like a very heavy phone, but it's solid, and I really don't have any issues with that personally. Now, as far as its durability goes, I've shown this in a different video where I actually dropped one of these on concrete by accident. I was setting it up to film with it, and actually it slid off a table and landed face down on concrete. I shared this in a different video, but that was not this phone. This is my main phone. This was the phone that actually did that. In that fall, it doesn't have a single scratch on it. And if I zoom in here or go into a macro mode here with cameras, you'll see along this outside edge, there's some little dings on the metal, but it didn't even touch the ceramic shield on the display. So it's incredibly strong glass as far as dropping it, and dropping it straight on concrete, it held up really well. The frame just has a couple small dings. You can't really notice it just looking at it at the front of the phone itself. You can't tell it's ever been dropped. Maybe a couple little things here in the bottom right, maybe you would notice if you were looking very closely. Otherwise, it's incredible. And the same is true for my 13 Pro Max that I use normally. There's not a single scratch on it that I can find anywhere. Under bright sunlight, I don't really see any micro scratches. It's just been very durable, similar to last year's phone when Apple started using ceramic shield. So I haven't had any issues as far as durability. It seems to hold up really well. And of course, if you want an added layer of protection, you can just put on a screen protector or put on a case, and of course avoid those problems even further because you'll have that additional protection. However, you'll add bulk to the phone and weight as well. Now, when it comes to battery, I think that's one of the number one reasons people upgraded to this phone this year. With its larger battery, it gets through a day without a problem. In fact, last night I put it on the charger and I was over 60% and had been off the charger for over 12 hours easily. If we go into settings and go to battery, you'll see my battery health is at 100%. Since it's a newer phone, it hasn't degraded just yet. It does typically degrade about 10% a year depending on usage. But if we go and take a look at yesterday, I had 3 hours of screen on time, or 3 hours and 25 minutes of screen on time, 5 hours and 50 minutes of screen off time, and used about 50% of my battery. However, depending on the day, it varies greatly. Some days it gets amazing battery life depending on what you're doing. If you're doing things like FaceTime and you're heavily using it, well, you're going to get less battery life. But typically, I haven't had a single day since I've used this that I'm really below 50% by the end of the day. This is a 2-day phone, I think, for most people, unless you're playing games heavily, using the video camera heavily, and more. Now, if your battery is low and you're out and about or on the go, while there are many ways to charge, Anchor is my go-to. Anchor is the official charging partner of Zollotech, and they've sponsored this video. And I genuinely use their products and love their products because they keep coming out with better devices or better ways to charge. Anchor has a new MagGo lineup, and this is one of them, and this is a battery pack that can charge your phone and give it an additional 17 hours or so of life on the iPhone 12 or 13 series. So it's a magnetic battery that has 5,000 milliamp hours of power and can charge at 7.5 watts. And unlike some of the competition, it has a built-in stand. So if we pull this top down here, it's a magnetic stand. You can just place it on the back like that. And if you want to watch a video, you can watch it in portrait, or you can tilt it to landscape as it's strong enough to hold the phone up in landscape. So it's a nice little battery pack. Of course, it has a status light on the bottom to show you what battery power is left, and you charge it via USB-C, and you can use one of their other chargers as well. It comes in this color here, misty blue, interstellar gray, dolomite white, lilac purple, and buds green. I'll leave a link to the 622 magnetic battery in the description below so you can check it out. I think this will be great, and it's a much better alternative to some others I've seen. Now, as far as the display goes, while the display is fantastic on the Pro devices, of course we have a smaller notch, and this is something I haven't really noticed. It doesn't get in my way personally, but the notch is smaller, so it's more out of the way than it was before, but it does protrude down a little bit more. But the best thing of this display is probably ProMotion, where it's just super smooth. Now, some apps don't support it yet, and that's up to the app developer to enable that. They could support it, but they just haven't chosen to do that yet in some cases. So it's pretty smooth if you go into different things that are Apple made, and it's hard to show on this camera since we're not at 120 frames per second or 120 hertz. So the refresh rate, you're not really going to see that smoothness, but it's definitely noticeable in slow motion next to an iPhone 13, for example. So when you're scrolling left to right or up and down, it's just a much smoother experience. It's the same experience you get on the iPad Pro, and it's definitely something I appreciate, but of course you could turn it off if you don't want to. But because it has the 120 hertz display, it can go down to 10 hertz and it saves battery, and that's some of the reasons it gets incredible battery life, like I mentioned before. Now, some others have asked me about PWM, or the way the display controls brightness. OLED displays typically control brightness by flickering faster or slower at a rate you can't see with your eyes, but under slow motion you can see it. The PWM on the 13 Pro Max for me is 100% unnoticeable. Only the most sensitive people are going to be able to notice that it's causing some sort of eye strain or giving you a headache or causing you to feel nauseated. Typically, the slower the PWM rate, the more susceptible you are to these sort of effects. But personally, I haven't had any issues with this, and it typically bothers me on some phones. I've not even thought about it. It's been such a great thing on this phone for me to use because even on the 12, I didn't really have an issue. This one is just even better than that. Now, as far as the cameras on this are phenomenal. They're good enough that you could use them for this video, making this video if you really wanted to. So not only do you have the new features from Apple, but you also have that macro mode, which I appreciate, getting up nice and close if you want to. Really getting in that detail on devices. I really appreciate that there's a macro mode here, and I do use it for certain videos. In fact, I've used it for videos like this to show you the damage around the outside edge of the phones, things like that. It's also really nice because it records in HDR and it's 4K 60. So 4K 60 HDR, just like last year, but of course we have that ProRes video, and that's something you could use. It definitely looks better, but it is a huge file size. So I typically don't use that because most people, once you compress it and put it on YouTube, can't tell the difference. But the camera is a jump from last year. I wouldn't say that it's worth upgrading for unless you want something specific, but other than that, it's a great addition. If you want macro or ProRes, then definitely it's worth the update. Now, in my daily use, I'm typically using this for things like social media. So Twitter, I have Twitter Blue. That's why the icon is a different color. I also use it for music a lot. My car lock is here. And then, of course, I have different social media apps such as Telegram and Discord, which I'll link in the description. I typically leave those there, but we have those communities. You can check those out. And normally I use the apps on the home screen. So Instagram, Twitter, Telegram, Discord, and then social media. It's a tool for me. It's not a gaming device for me, for the most part, except for maybe on the iPad. I typically play these games, but I really like using the phone for that. I don't watch a whole lot of YouTube on here. And again, if we go under my battery, you can see what I'm using here in my apps. So those are the things I typically use. It's mostly a tool for social media, email, websites and things like that. So that's my daily use. Of course, if you're using it more heavily, it may drain the battery quickly, but for the most part, it's not an issue. And the phone doesn't typically get very warm for me. Some people have complained that iPhones have gotten warm in the past, specifically with the iPhone 12 Pro models. This one seems to stay much cooler for me, and I've noticed that over the past few months. Now, as far as the speakers, I haven't noticed any degradation in the speakers over time. They still sound loud and clear. Sometimes in the older phones, such as my iPhone 11 Pro Max, the speakers start to sound pretty poor after a half a year or so, or even a few months. These have really held up to be the same as they were when they were new. So that's a nice thing. Maybe they've made some improvements there. And also the reception seems to be pretty good. Initially, there were a lot of issues for me, but once Apple came out with iOS 15.2, it seems to be much better in my use case. So I really haven't had too many issues switching between 5G and 4G and LTE and Wi-Fi, those sorts of things, 5G UC. It seems to be okay for me. Phone calls never really drop, and I don't have too many issues with that. I know some people did, especially with earlier versions of iOS, but I think they've really ironed that out for this one. And so that brings me to, should you pick up an iPhone 13 Pro Max if you haven't already, or should you wait for next year's iPhone 14? The iPhone 14 is said to have maybe a better display, a different display without a notch, and a hole punch display, and maybe some additional features as well, such as 8K video and more. Of course, we'll have to wait and see on that, but Apple does update their phones every few years. I don't know if I'd expect a full redesign next year, as they typically do that every 3 years now, but maybe we'll have the same framing with upgraded cameras and a different display again, and of course, different internals for speed and performance. Speed and performance on this really are not an issue, and that's why I don't hardly mention it, as it's super fast. It doesn't really slow down, whether that's playing music or watching video or using picture-in-picture or playing a game. It's super fast and always is fast, so no issues there. But if you should wait for a 14, I don't know if you want to do that unless you really want something specific. Maybe you really don't like the notch. You may want to see if Apple does eliminate that on the Pro models. Otherwise, it's a great phone. I can highly recommend it, and it's something I'll continue to use as my main phone regularly. Let me know if you have one in the comments below, if you're planning to pick one up, or if you're going to wait until next year or maybe a few years out. If you're happy with the phone you have, you could have an iPhone 8 or 6 and still be happy with it. I'd love to hear from you and what you're using in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.